Hey guys, National Master James Canty III here, and today we have another puzzle. This is going to be awesome, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Before we get into it though, make sure you guys subscribe to the video and to all the social media for Super Nezzy. Thank you so much for being here, and make sure you put some comments in there about any puzzles that you guys would like to see and anything like that. So let's get right into it. This puzzle is actually a very special puzzle, and I'll tell you guys why in a little bit. So we're going to go through some tries and things like that. But this puzzle is actually white to move here. White to move, and it's a sequence of moves, and there's a lot of moves that can happen here in this game with the white pieces. So I want you to pause the video for a second here and actually see if you can find the right idea for white here. Is it a win or is it a draw? So take a second, pause the video, and see, is this a win or a draw for white? Now, when you get back to the video, if you said it's a win, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. If it says a draw, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. We're going to get right into it. I'm not telling you. We're going to see it right here. So let's see what happened. And who made this puzzle? It's actually from Arpad Rusz, who's a Romanian chess in-game composer. So let's see what happened here and what did he want this to be as an outcome. So let's see what happened. Let's see some moves here. If you guys have made some moves in your head already, we're going to go through some things here and see kind of what some of the best moves are. It's white to move here. So in games, before we make some moves here, usually you want to place yourself or your rook on the long side of the board. So there's 4 over here and there's 3 over here. So we usually want to place our rook over here on the long side, just so we can try to get this queen in and we have more space to maneuver. So let's see what happens if we play rook to h8. Rook to h8, what's the idea here? Well, the idea with rook h8 is actually to just push the pawn and queen. And if we have any checks that may happen, we can just sidestep it and be able to queen, because this is covering the queenie square. So my rook is covering it. But for black, I have this move here, rook to c3. Rook c3 works on the spot, and now white's losing. How? Well, let's see. Let's look at it. We have a few moves here. Let's try d7. d7 is the most obvious move here, just the queen. That's why we did this. Well, rook has to kind of stop this, so let's try the check now. Rook to d3 check. Rook d3 check. I can't go this way. I can't go on this file at all. Nowhere else to go. If I go here, I'm going to be taken easily. I have to go king to c6. There's nothing left to do. But I have another rook. So the rook on e6 comes in here and checks the king. Now I'm either going to move off and lose this pawn and might as well lose the game at that point, or I'm going to have to go here, king c7. Makes sense. I'm still able to queen next move, but I have this nice move here of rook to e7, and now this is pinned. There's a big issue here. After rook to e1, now I just walk my king around. Very simple here. Very simple. Just walk the king around, and I'm able to snag this because of zugzwang. So not the way that we want to go. Let's go back a few moves here. So instead of d7, okay, well maybe rook h4. Let's try this. What's rook h4 about? If you ever heard of the Lucena position, or building a bridge, a lot of times you want to bring your rook to the 4th rank and actually block any checks. So if there's a check here, well then I can block it. I can go right here and block it, and then after rook takes, then I can just push this pawn right through. Usually that's how that will work. But after rook h4, my move for black, instead of checking, will be rook to e8. A little bit different here. I just change everything around. So now if you go rook d4, you check me instead of me checking you. I can just go rook to d3. Or even better, king to e3. This actually works a lot better. And then what you want to get, your rook has to be behind the pawn most times. This is what you want to have. And if your rook's behind the pawn, well, first off, my king can't move anywhere. So after king to e3, I have to figure out where to move my rook. This rook has kind of nowhere to go. So I'll put here, I'll go rook to d8 or rook to d1. This is probably the best move. And it is the best move, actually. After rook to d1, I'll go rook to d8. And we have this position here. So white has to choose a different kind of flank, which is the longer flank over here. If you look at this, this is 4, and over here this is 3. So this is the longer side of the board. I have forced white into going into the long side of the board, which there's a lot of room to maneuver, which gives me a lot of time as well for these rooks to actually snag this pawn. I'll show you, case in point. After king to e6, we can go king e2. I'm hitting this rook right here. Rook to d4. Rook e3 check, so there's no king to d2. After king f7, I can now take over this, and there's a lot of room to maneuver for everyone over here as I get to blockade this pawn and easily come up with the win. After king f6, rook e8 is one of the quickest ways to win, followed by rook d5, rook e4, king f5, and rook to h4. A lot of maneuvering here, guys. A lot of maneuvering, but at the end of the day here, I'm able to win. And after this sequence here, this takes some time. Rook check, because now the king can't go here. King has to go here. Check. You got to stay around the rook. I take, and I take on e2. Very, very simple. Very, very surprising that this can happen in these kind of positions, but it comes with understanding the short and the long side of the board here. So looks like that could have been pretty nice, but that just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So d7, rook h4 doesn't work. So it looks like rook h8 is just not going to work out for us. So how about we try another move? Well, if you try rook h8, it doesn't work. How about maybe king d4? Let's try that. That's another try. King d4 is a try that we can look at. Kind of really didn't do anything but just move the king a little bit forward. More, if anything, you would like to move your king this way, maybe not towards my king. But let's see what happens. I'm going to follow up with the same move, rook to c3 here. So the king is still limited on spaces. Kind of really don't want to move the rook. You kind of just want to push this pawn. So d7. So if the rook moves, now we're about to queen. Rook to d3 check. King anywhere, c5 or c4. And I could go rook to e6, cutting the king off from where it should be. If king to b5, I have rook e to d6 here. So now I'm able to just win this pawn. It's doubled. There's no way to protect it anymore. That's just losing. Same thing with king to c4. I put the rook here. And again, it's just losing. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So king d4 looks like that's just not going to be a good one for us either. Look like that's not going to work. So the only other move that we have here that we could consider, because we already tried d7. Well, actually, let's look at d7 too. d7, rook, and rook a8. So d7, actually, this d7 move, what is this about? Well, d7 keeps the symmetry going, and it's just like I can't move. Maybe I can go king e3, but this move right here is a very interesting in-game move. You would think king e6 would be the move, but it's actually king to d1. Sorry, king to d1, and it actually keeps the symmetry in between the kings here and keeps the symmetry in between the rooks as well. I think this is a very, very interesting move here. If we have rook to c8, for instance, if rook to c8, let's actually try rook e8 first. If rook to e8, then we have rook e to d2 check, king e6, rook check, because this is hanging, so you got to stay around it. King e7, rook c7, rook here, and we just walk the king up again with zugzwang being inevitable. What about the other side? How about rook c8? Okay, well, if rook c8, same move, rook c to d2, or actually the other way, same thing, check, and we pin, and then we walk the king up with a zugzwang. Pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. Well, what happens if I don't go king d1? What if I go like rook c3? Well, rook c3 is actually bad due to rook e8. This is good to know. Look at this. As white plays rook to e8, we have rook d3 check, and then the king just steps away. So there's no check here on e6 anymore. I'm threatening the queen. So there's going to be a draw after just rook takes e2. Rook takes e2 because you would have to. Or you would just go into a perpetual back and forth, because there's no way to stop the queen. So that wouldn't work. And the same thing goes for rook to e3. You just go the other way, rook c8, I check. There's no check here. Pretty cool to understand what's going on here. But d7 doesn't work due to king d1. King d1 doesn't work. So now if we try rook c8, again, rook d2, rook d2 and rook e6, and then the other way as well, if we go rook e8, check, or actually the other way, check, check, and then back over here once again. So we've exhausted our options. We've exhausted many options. We got a few other rook moves we can make. But the answer here, guys, the answer here, and if you got the answer, pat yourself on the back. Round of applause. You did awesome. You did awesome. This is the long side of the board. This is usually where you should keep your rook. The solution here is actually putting it on the short side of the board. And that's what makes this a very special study, because most times you keep your in game. In the in game, you keep your rooks on the long side of the board for more maneuvering and etc. So because we place ours on the short side of the board, it's very interesting. So rook a8. Let's check out what happens on rook to a8. A lot can happen here. I can go rook to e3, or I can go rook to c3. Let's check out rook e3 first. After rook e3, well, what happens on d7 now? Same thing. Long side would have been different, but we played d7. Long side would have lost. So d7, let's try it now. Well, d7, afraid to say it, it actually loses. Rook to d3 check, same thing here. King has to go here. Rook to c6 check, king e7. And rook to c7. It just doesn't win. It's not good for white. So rook to c3, and actually instead of if rook to e3, we'll actually go rook to a4. That's the solution here. Because rook a4, because now we go into again a Lucena position kind of thing, where I can play rook to c8 or I can play rook to d3. If I go rook to d3 check, there's rook to d4. And now because if we have a take and capture here, this pawn is not going to be able, black's not going to be able to stop this pawn just with his rook. The king is boxed out. He can't get around here fast enough to stop it. So that just wouldn't work. That wouldn't work here. So let's try rook to c8 then. Rook to c8 to get out of the way. And after rook to c8, there's rook to d4. Sorry. Okay, rook to d4 here. Rook to d4 and king f6. Now this is very similar. We've seen this before on the other side when the rooks were on different squares. d7 will be failing immediately. As you see, this is kind of held. The king is held by the rook, or the rook is held by the king. And after you play rook to d8, it's very simple here, and this is just winning. You're either going to give up this or you're giving up this, or either both. It's just not going to win there. It's not what we want to do at all. But the solution is actually rook to d1. Rook to d1, white has managed to transfer his rook behind the passed pawn, which is this right here. So this rook is finally behind the passed pawn where it needs to be. The king is kind of blocked out here, and there's a lot that can happen. But actually, let's go back. I actually want to show you guys this right here, what happens on rook to c3. If rook to c3, then you just play rook to a2 check. So it's very simple. We pick up one of the rooks, no matter where you go, and then we're just going to queen this and become a draw. Become a draw. So the only way for me to try for a win will be rook to e3. And then rook to c8, rook d4 check, king f6, and bring the rook down to not d7. The rook comes over to d1. Star move, rook d1, keeping the rook behind the pawn here, threatening to push and walk the king up. What a way of doing this. The short side wins for us as we tried rook everything else. Rook a8 is the winning, not the winning move, but the game, the move that helped us the most in this game. So rook to d8, king to c6. The white can choose the shorter flank here. So we're using the short side over here, not the long side, So after king to c2, as you would see, rook to d5 would be a blunder, just as these two moves look so cool. But let's try it. What happens on rook d5? Why is this a blunder? Well, let's check it out. Rook to c8. Okay, rook to c8 check. If king to d7, I can go rook here, and that's like very interesting how that works. Or even rook here, actually. But now after king b7, king to b7 is rook to c4. Rook to c4, I cut the king off, and I'm able to get back. Actually, and watch this, d7, because now I can't get here, but there's going to be a series of checks, and then I come back and snag the pawn on the way out. Check, check. Rook here, rook takes, king takes, rook back. I get to get back in time. Doesn't work. Rook d5, so weird. Well, what about rook to d4? What's the difference? Well, let's see. Rook to c3, I go king b7. King b7. A little bit different. Rooks can't connect. I can also push this pawn, and this rook has to stay here. Your king can't cross. Very interesting. Let's see what happens. Rook to d7. And then king to b6. Now both black's king and one of the rooks are on the shorter flank where there's less, there's less space to maneuver. So this is all space that's very, very small for the black pieces, and for white as well. White is on the shorter side of the files here. So rook to c8, rook to d5, very good move here. Rook to d5, and we just kind of shuffle a little bit. Rook to c4. Now white can't really move. Or the white rook can't even move. I mean, I actually can't move anywhere. So if I move somewhere, I may run into king f6, rook e5, or rook g5. There's a lot of stuff that I can't do, so I'm going to go king to b5. King b5 is followed up with rook to c3. After rook c3, there's king b6. We go back and forth here as this is looking like a draw. Rook to a3 and rook d4. I'm trying to grab this space so I can push and run right through. So he plays king to c3, not allowing me to. I put my rook back on d1, again the same threat, and then he goes king c4, allowing me to do it. So I go king to c6. Just let me do it. He plays rook d to a7, which is very funny. If you play d7, you get mated on the move. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful mate. What a beautiful mate. But instead, I just follow it with rook to c1, king b4, rook b1. Just give some more checks here. We have king a4 and king a5. Let's try king a5. King a5, rook b5 check, rook b6 check, check again. The king finally gets to a4, and then we bring the rook back to the center. Again, these pieces are too far away. Because we're on the short side, and because we were dominant on this short side, and we're able to maneuver the correct way, we were able to get a position like this where there is now a draw. All the black pieces are ending up, misplaced on the A file here, and it's on the short side where there's less maneuvering space. There's less space to maneuver. The key here in this puzzle is that I was able to use the short side instead of the long side because it was detrimental to use that. It was the only exception to the rule in this position. Rook d5, all the pieces are messed up. So rook a8, I go d7. And that's a draw from here. How do you stop rook d8? Or how do you even stop it? If rook d8, then I just queen. And it's just not happening. It's just a draw. Definitely a draw. Check, I can even block here. And then play king c7. Many things that you can do. So I think this is a very interesting, very hard and very intriguing study, a puzzle that's very, very difficult. And it's an endgame that is very, very well known when it comes to like coming back and like comebacks in chess and etc. like that. Like this is pretty tough. I mean, guys, you have to work on this side of the board usually with the long side, and coming to the short side really messes up your chances. And being able to do that with rook a8 here is very, very out of this world when it comes to like in games like this. This is pretty awesome. So as you guys saw today, we put our rooks on the short side here. So very, very good puzzle. Very, very long, hard understanding puzzle. So thanks so much for sticking around for this puzzle here, guys. If you want to see any other puzzles, make sure you put them under the comments here. That'd be great. Make sure you guys subscribe to all the channels here and everything social media wise for Super Nezzy. Thank you so much. I'm National Master James Canty III. I'll see you on the next one.